The room went completely silent. 30 people at that conference table, and not one of them said a word. They'd all watched Marcus's manager cut him off mid-sentence for the third time in the same meeting, talking over him, dismissing his numbers, taking credit for a project Marcus had spent 4 months building. Everyone in that room expected Marcus to do what people always do. Nod. Go quiet. Wait until it was over. Instead, Marcus set his pen down slowly, looked his manager dead in the eyes, and said 7 words that would change the entire trajectory of his career. What he said next, and what happened in the weeks after, will tell you everything you need to know about the psychology of men who simply will not tolerate disrespect. But first, if you've ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken, if you've ever let something slide that you knew you shouldn't have, stay with me. Because what I'm about to show you isn't just psychology, it's a blueprint. There's a moment every man reaches. Someone crosses a line. Publicly, deliberately, and everyone around is watching to see what you do next. Most men freeze, not because they're weak, but because their brain is running a rapid calculation. What's the cost of responding? What's the cost of staying silent? And for most men, that calculation defaults to silence, because silence feels safe. But here's what the psychology actually shows. Researchers at the University of Amsterdam studied workplace dynamics for over a decade. What they found destroyed the idea that staying quiet is ever truly safe. Every time a man absorbs a public disrespect without response, his social value drops. Not just in the eyes of the person who disrespected him, but in the eyes of every single witness in that room. Silence isn't neutral, it's a signal. And the people around you read it fluently. They file it, they remember it. And slowly, almost invisibly, they recalibrate how much they respect you and how far they can push you. This is the trap most men never see until it's too late. Because by the time you realize your silence has been read as permission, the disrespect has already compounded. It isn't one person anymore, it's a pattern. And patterns are far harder to reverse than moments. Men who don't tolerate disrespect understand something at a deep, almost instinctive level. That the moment you let one thing slide, you're not just letting that thing slide. You're setting the floor for everything that comes after. Now, here's where most people get this completely wrong. They assume men who refuse to tolerate disrespect are hot-headed, reactive, driven by ego or insecurity or unresolved anger. That's the surface read, and it's backwards. The neuroscience tells a different story. When the average person is disrespected, the amygdala fires, the brain's threat detection center. Cortisol spikes. The body enters a stress response, and from that flooded state, people either explode impulsively or shut down entirely. Men who don't tolerate disrespect have trained a different response. Their amygdala fires too. They feel the disrespect, clearly and immediately. But what follows is different. Instead of flooding, their prefrontal cortex activates faster. The part of the brain responsible for strategic thinking, long-term consequence analysis, and controlled action. They don't react. They decide. That distinction is everything. A reaction is your nervous system speaking. A decision is your character speaking. And what these men decide, almost universally, is that disrespect acknowledged calmly and firmly is 10 times more powerful than disrespect met with rage. Rage makes the other person the victim. Calmness makes them accountable. This is why the most psychologically formidable men you've ever encountered rarely raise their voice. They don't need to. Their response is so deliberate, so completely without panic, that it carries a weight that shouting never could. Think about the men in your life, or in history, who truly commanded respect. Were they the loudest in the room? Or were they the ones who, when they finally spoke, made the room go quiet? Back to Marcus. 30 people at that table. His manager had just interrupted him for the third time, waving off his data like it was noise. The kind of casual dismissal designed to remind everyone in the room of the hierarchy. Marcus set his pen down, looked at his manager, not with anger, not with nerves, with absolute stillness, and said, "Let me finish, then you can respond." 7 words, quiet voice, unblinking eye contact. The manager opened his mouth, closed it. The room didn't breathe. And Marcus picked up exactly where he'd been cut off, finished his full point, and sat back without another word. What happened next is what the psychology predicts every time. The manager didn't escalate. He nodded, stiffly, uncomfortably, and moved the meeting forward. Because here's the truth about people who disrespect others publicly. They are almost never prepared for calm resistance. They are prepared for silence, for nervousness, for over-explanation, for aggression they can dismiss. They are not prepared for a man who is completely, utterly unbothered by their disapproval. That's the weapon. Not anger, not confrontation, composure with a spine. In the weeks after that meeting, something shifted for Marcus. The interruptions stopped. His manager began CCing him on emails he'd previously been excluded from. Other colleagues who'd watched that moment started seeking him out, treating his input differently. One moment of calm refusal had done what months of silent competence never could. It had established, in the language everyone in that office understood, exactly where his floor was, and nobody wanted to go below it. Now, before you take everything I've said and think this is a simple formula, stop. Because there is a dark side to this psychology that almost nobody talks about. And it's the thing that separates men who command genuine respect from men who just create enemies. Men who refuse to tolerate disrespect walk a razor's edge. On one side, earned respect, clear boundaries, psychological sovereignty. On the other side, isolation, escalating conflict, and a pattern of burning bridges that eventually leaves them standing alone, wondering what went wrong. The difference comes down to one thing: what counts as disrespect. There are men who have calibrated this correctly. Their threshold is high. They absorb small things, daily friction, honest mistakes, cultural differences, without flinching. But when a genuine line is crossed, they respond with surgical precision. And people around them feel safe. They know where the boundaries are. They respect them because the man respects himself without being a threat. Then there are men who have calibrated this wrong. Their threshold is hair trigger. Every perceived slight becomes a battle. Every uncomfortable conversation becomes a confrontation. Every disagreement reads as disrespect. These men aren't strong. They're fragile. And the constant conflict they generate isn't a sign of self-respect. It's a sign of a man who has never learned the difference between dignity and ego. Dignity says that genuinely crossed a line and I will address it. Ego says that made me feel small and someone will pay for it. One builds a life, the other burns them down, one relationship at a time. Here's the test. Ask yourself honestly. When you feel disrespected, are you responding to what actually happened, or to the story your ego is telling you about what happened? Most men, if they're honest, can't always tell the difference. The men who can, those are the ones who are genuinely dangerous to cross, and genuinely safe to be around. Before we get to the final part of this, the part that explains exactly how these men are built and whether this can actually be learned, drop a comment right now. Have you ever had a moment where you wish you'd spoken up and didn't? Or a moment where you did speak up and it changed everything? Tell me below. And if this is hitting close to home, hit subscribe. Because what we're about to cover next is the part most psychology channels won't say out loud. Here's the question that actually matters. Is this wiring you're born with, or is it something a man can build? The research points to both, and the answer is more uncomfortable than most people want to hear. Some of it is temperament. Studies on early childhood development show that children who develop what psychologists call a high internal locus of control, the deep belief that their outcomes are driven by their own choices, not external forces, are significantly more likely to grow into adults who hold firm under social pressure, including the pressure of disrespect. They weren't taught a script. They developed a relationship with themselves that made other people's approval largely irrelevant to their sense of stability. But here's the part nobody wants to say. Most men who carry themselves this way were forged by something, not born comfortable in their own skin, broken in at some point by an environment that forced them to decide who they were when the pressure was on. A father who demanded they stand up for themselves, a period of social isolation that taught them they could survive without approval, a humiliation so public and so complete that they made a decision, never again, and built from that moment forward. Marcus didn't wake up one morning with unshakable composure. He'd spent 2 years being passed over, talked over, and minimized in that company before the day of that meeting. 2 years of going home, sitting with the discomfort, and slowly, painfully, getting clear on what he was and wasn't willing to accept anymore. His calm in that meeting room wasn't a technique he'd learned. It was a man who had already decided, long before he walked into that room. And that's the real psychology of men who don't tolerate disrespect. It's not a skill. It's not a personality type. It's not even confidence in the conventional sense. It's clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you've decided you're worth. Clarity that runs so deep that when someone tries to rewrite that story in real time, in a meeting room, at a dinner table, in front of people who are watching, your nervous system doesn't panic. It just remembers what you already decided and responds accordingly. You were never supposed to tolerate everything. You were never meant to absorb every slight, swallow every dismissal, and smile through every moment someone tried to make you feel smaller than you are. The men you genuinely respect don't do that. Not the ones who've built real things, real relationships, real lives. They have flaws, clear, firm, non-negotiable flaws, and people feel those flaws without being told about them. The question isn't whether you should hold that standard for yourself. The question is whether you've decided to. Because the decision comes first. Before everything else, the composure, the calm, the voice that makes a room go quiet, all of it follows the decision. Make the decision. If this hits different from what you usually watch, that's the point. Drop a comment with the moment in this video that stopped you. And subscribe because we go this deep every single time.